Welcome to the Smooth Sands of Monotony. Here again with Josh Price. Today, decided we were going to kind of go into a concept that a lot of people I don't feel are truly embracing in America right now, and that is empathy. And Josh, thank you for being along and being a good sport to kind of tackle this loss that I think America is embracing at this point in time. So
Yeah, absolutely. Glad to be here. Hopefully, I
good.
can shed perspective and my own thoughts on this.
But hopefully we dig into some depths and find something that both
Yeah.
of us didn't know we had or thought was out there.
Yep.
So just for the sake of clarity, the dictionary definition of empathy is the ability to understand and share the feelings of another. Sympathy is definitely different.
Hmm.
So really, it's the walking in somebody else's shoes
Hmm.
analogy that we always hear being tossed around. And I know that's the general thought process on it, but what specifically does empathy mean for you, and how do you practice that on a daily basis?
Yeah. So I think empathy for me is, if anything, it's kind of staying in the uncomfortableness of maybe somebody else, right? So it's like the ability to, people say all the time, like hold space or make space or whatever without the needing to fix, explain, defend anything from my side. Just to be fully present with somebody else's reality, even when it's heartbreaking, even when it is uncomfortable, even when you don't want to stay there. It's against maybe your opinions or your thoughts or your beliefs, and like, but listening to their pain, or making sure that you're listening to their pain or whatever they're going through more, and it means more to you than your own opinion. um just being interruptible, teachable, tender in those moments. That's what I think empathy, um and a lot of that comes from, just the time with my daughter and just seeing the people that were very empathetic, you know uh when they would come and sit with us, and even still today when they come and sit with us and everything.
The people who put in the effort versus just saying, "Oh, oh, that sucks," and then kind of
Yeah.
moving on down the road.
Yeah, that sucks is kind of the sympathy. Oh, that
Yeah,
that must be really hard for you. Yeah, you're
yeah.
damn right it's really hard. But the person who actually says, hey, let me come over and sit with you for a while. I think
Or what can I do for you, or
yeah,
how
or
how
what
do
can
I
I
make it easier? Yeah.
Yeah, so the what I can do for you, like, that's the compassionate empathy, right? It's taking compassion and turning it into action. And we'll probably talk about this a little bit later and everything, but that's where I really feel like America is lacking, is in compassionate empathy. So
It's so you don't think it's even that they're having empathy in the initial step. So it's not even them going through that gate, it's them going through that gate and then taking the next step of compassion. Because I tend to see it as there people aren't even willing to take that first step.
yeah, yeah. So yeah, like I said, yeah. So I actually think, and this is going to be totally crazy. You ready?
Uh, you're in a
Totally,
safe space.
I'm not- totally crazy. I actually think there's more empathy in America now than there ever has been.
Really.
Yes. Yes. And the way that it's showing up is in the fact that there's all this turmoil and there's all this tension. And it's because there's so many people that probably would not have brought up their empathy, or trying to hold space or speak out against these injustices. Like, in terms of that, in America, we've never been here before. Like, before, it was, sweeping it under the rug, not talking about it, not, taking on racism, fascism, but now we are openly, it's in the market. It's in the marketplace like it's never been. And I
Yeah.
find it actually really, really amazing, even though it's scary as hell.
Well, then the question comes is if it is out in the marketplace and it is the battleground that is being fought, does it seem to be winning? And that's maybe in that is perceptually where I'm
Oh,
coming from, as are people even making that step? And maybe it's just the fact that it is there and it's just losing. Do you think so? You think the battle is commenced, and that we are in the battle, in the conceptual end of it, of the empathetic battle, and people are fighting back? Are we winning? Are the people who are caring and demonstrating that winning, or are we possibly on? I hate bringing up Nazis because that's always like the worst case scenario, and everybody's like, oh, that's where it's going to go. There are other bad possibilities that don't go that route. um,
yeah.
Jim Crow is a perfect example of how it
Yes.
can go bad without it
Yes.
going that route. And so, are we on a trajectory of that, or from what you're seeing amongst your peers and from the people that are we on that trajectory, or are we on something different?
Man, it's such a great question. I personally think we're winning. I think we're losing the battle right now, but we're winning the war. And the reason why is, yes, my sample size is small, but talking to my very Republican father and seeing his heart get changed and his heart starting to say, hey, I don't like this. This isn't okay. This is, we're hearing it, a lot. Maybe it's not as much as we want to. This isn't what I voted for. Hearing, uh, just even the last few days, what was it, the Latinas for Trump coming out and saying, like, this is bad. We don't like this.
Mhm.
Um, I think it is little by little by little. But even some of the, you know, the races for governors and not governors, but like mayors and Congress seats and stuff like that that are starting to move and everything. I go, man, this is interesting. Like there's is something going on here. And I even told my sister very, very early on back in January that there's going to be a great attack, right? This is, again, you don't want to go to the Nazis, but the Blitzkrieg. This is the Blitzkrieg, and if we can survive this and last it and everything, like the end of this could actually be amazing. We could be closer to the America that we ever want if we will just stand strong, keep voting, keep speaking up, keep being like Ryan. One of the most amazing things to me that I saw when Donald Trump got elected was how many people in my news feed were like, I'm going to stand up against this by doing X. I'm going to help people in my community by doing this, by doing that. And I was just like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Because,
Motivating.
yeah, because change comes through action. This is what we need. It's not just
Yes.
talking and throwing out stuff, but actually doing stuff.
And I mean, that kind of goes into the is our generation and the generation before us, which would be the back end of the baby boomers, were things in such a stable point that there was no challenge, there was no involvement. And you get up until really 9/11, and then all of a sudden there's an action and a motivation involved. And in that, there is a huge surge of a lack of empathy, especially when it came to embracing racial biases or religious biases specifically. And are we now seeing the eventual output of that, of two generations that really didn't have a lot of complexities to their life now actually being
Yeah.
challenged.
Yeah, I think so.
Um,
And ignoring it, just ignoring the racism and everything, as I talk to the older, generations and everything that are within my family and everything, it's just like there is no racism. What are you talking about? You know, there everything you're talking like no. And I'm like, man, they don't even see it. And to be completely honest, growing up the way that I did in Texas too, I didn't see it either. It wasn't until I joined the army. It wasn't until I went to DC. It wasn't until I went into the world and was had my eyes opened and was like, oh my gosh, there's so much more going on out here in terms of racism and inequality and everything else that uh, I just never experienced. But once I did, was like, okay, like this is real. Let's stand up for this. Let's do something about it.
yeah, for me, that was the going from the north, living in the south, and going back to the north,
Mhm.
and that seeing and it to argue that racism is a southern problem, it's not. Um, to argue that racism is the only problem, it's not.
Right.
There's all these isms or biases that we are
Mhm.
carrying, that those erode our ability to be empathic.
Mhm.
That, okay, I see this person and I don't move the way they do, I don't act the way they do, I
Mhm.
don't believe the way they do, therefore I can't feel for them.
Yep.
But we fail to make that additional step that they are human.
Yes.
And somebody in Africa, somebody in Asia, somebody in the deepest parts of Siberia all feel the basic same things:
Yeah.
love, hate, sadness, joy, whatever it happens to be. We all have the same emotions. We may not express it the same way, we may not deal with it the same way, because that may be cultural, but we can still empathize with the people who are involved without necessarily drawing ourselves into something that has to be like us.
Mhm. Yeah.
And it one of the things that always gets me is when you'll hear like somebody complain, oh man, they're they're pressing like LGBTQ stuff on me, man. I can't believe they're doing that. Like, it's all over the TV and I got to watch it during commercials and stuff like that. And it's like, you do realize like 20 years ago, seeing a mixed race couple in a commercial was a big deal.
Yeah.
And now it's not.
Yep.
So yes, it's normalizing, but at the same token, that is happening in America.
Yes.
These are our neighbors.
Yep.
Why can't we feel for them? Why can't we walk in their shoes, at
Yeah.
least symbolically, even
Yeah.
if we won't do it physically?
Yeah. And my wife, her favorite question, if that comes up or anything else, is, and how is this hurting you?
Yeah.
How is this changing your life in any way? Like, come on, and
The biggest answer I get out of that is that it impacts me because I have to see it. So what?
right. So what? Yeah.
So what? That's like in Afghanistan, the Taliban ended up destroying the Buddhist statues.
Hmm.
Why? Like, okay, I get it. It's a frontier religion. It's art. It is nothing to do with you. You can't handle the fact that your religion can't handle
Right.
that
Yes.
challenge. That has nothing to do with the fact that,
Right.
oh, it's offending you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
thus we hit the real crux of it all, which is a lot of this comes from religion, and a lot of this comes from conservatism, trying to hold on to or justifying these isms uh through their religion,
Mm.
and one of those being Christianity, which holds up compassion. So it really is a crazy paradox when they throw legalism in your face and everything else, and yet Jesus is supposed to be compassionate and everything. So yeah.
I'm glad you brought that up, because that's one of the ones that always gets me about where we are right now. is one of the prime tenets of Christianity, not Judaism, but actual Christianity,
Hmm.
is compassion. It is empathy.
Yes.
And it astounds me at the fact that the hypocrisy
Hmm.
of saying that you need to do this while you're in the temple or in the church, yet when you step out, you are not walking that same walk.
Right.
And one of the great memes that goes around is the one about how if Jesus were here and he was saying what he said back then, now
Yeah.
he'd be crucified by the Christians here
Yeah.
because he's saying the things. So,
Yeah. Well, that just happened on TikTok. It
oh
was
no,
there's a very like TikTok famous poster and everything, and she got she got on her platform and literally, I think there was no tat or no headline, no nothing. She didn't do anything. She just opened up her Bible and started reading. That's it. Just started reading the red letter words, the Jesus words out of I think it was Matthew 25, and the Christians came for her like crazy. Like, I'm a Christian, and you're weaponizing this against us or whatever. And she's like, all I did was read the words. And then who ended up defending her was like the atheists, the agnostics, the more compassionate Christians and everything. But it was insane. They were trying to torture her, they were trying to burn her down, literally just reading the words of Jesus.
which how do you not read these passages? And that then begs the question: is the source of that the medium that is presenting it? Because to get the message religiously, you're getting that from a religious leader. So is that coming from the preacher, the priest, the imam, the rabbi, whoever is teaching those passages and spreading that through? Or is that just people embracing their inherent biases that they are getting culturally and then ignoring it?
Yeah, man, it's a really good question. Again, I do know from experience that that a lot of these people are getting this from the pulpit, from their preacher and everything, who is teaching them, a Christian nationalist view of it all. Selecting and choosing, not just the verses and everything, but the interpretation of it, telling people, hey, this is how you need to think about this. And that phrase happens a lot. The way I want you to think about this is this.
Mm.
Right. And when you hear that, it should always red flag, write down a question. Why are they telling me to think about it this way? I need to go study this verse deeper, including the church that I go to. I go to a Messianic Jewish congregation. So it's Jews that believe in Jesus. But the rabbi will sometimes say, the way I want you to think about this is, and I go, great,
Excuse
let me
me.
write that one down and let me go look it up later, because why is he telling me this? And I need to go find for myself like what this really sounds like in the interpretation of all of God and Jesus and everything else. But um, back to the original premise of empathy and the erosion of it, that's where I think the main erosion has come from. To your statement of like, we're in this low place, man, I think that the most painful erosion is in the church. And that's what makes it so just nasty right now.
Is that necessarily something new though?
I
I
don't
mean,
think,
I know there was a Calvinist influx, especially within the Baptists and the
yeah,
Methodists within the last 15 years, um, of the predetermination and that conceptual idea being pushed hard within those groups. But is that necessarily new? Because if you look at effectively the Christian nationalists of the Nazi Party.
Mm-hmm.
They were doing that. You had the people who were social Darwinists who were applying that from I forget what the movement was back in the 1800s, also using the veil of Christianity. You
Yep.
had Christianity being used against the enslaved Black population of America to tell them, here's what's in the Bible. This is why you need to stay in your
Yep.
place. It is where, and I mean, admittedly, as an atheist, it is one of the things where it concerns me that Christianity has a hold as a concept, but not as a practice and a reality, especially when the most endearing thing of the religion is the empathy.
Yeah.
It is the man who went out and found the hurt, the wounded, the diseased, the unwanted, and made them part of the flock. And now we're in a situation where we don't have that. We don't have that empathetic piece. And they are using the cross as their weapon instead of their representation of their good. Not that I wanted to get off on religion, but
no, but I think it matters in the terms of empathy and everything, because a lot of times you're right. Like even empathy is weaponized, right? It's like, well, if you don't have Jesus, how do you have empathy? If you don't believe these things, how do you have this, right? But nowadays it's more truth. How do you have truth if you don't have these? But anyway, when you say, is this a new thing in Christianity or anything, and then you gave, really great examples of it's not. It's been going on forever. The reality, I think, is it goes all the way back to the Garden of Eden, right? Because it goes all the way back to when man chose to understand good and evil, and to make good and evil the premise that everything is based on, versus the tree of life, right? So what does that mean? Well, what it means and everything is that they chose judgment versus choosing mercy. So if you look at the tree of life in the Jewish tradition, set across from each other is chesed, right, which is mercy, loving kindness, and Givorah, which is judgment. Well, they chose judgment over mercy and loving kindness. They chose the left side of the tree.
So we've been carrying the wrong ideology right from the initial get-go.
I think so. And the way that the rabbis and everything kind of teach this is like, what we actually need is the balance of the two, because Hesed can get carried too far too, where we're just being too merciful and we're letting people get away with things or whatever, really bad things. And the middle is Tiferet, which is like harmony, right? That's that middle piece and everything, which they call the heart of Torah. Right.
Which is funny. The Romans actually carried a similar value, which I completely agree with. I break it down to pretty much everything in moderation.
Everything in moderation. Yeah, sure.
If you are too sad, that's not a good Roman virtue. If you're too happy, that's not a good Roman virtue. You need to have both happiness and sadness, anger and sympathy. You have to have empathy and love, but you can't be to the point where you're abused or overrun by it. You have to have that balance. So it's funny that conceptually is there, that you need that balance, and that is echoed.
Balance. Yeah.
Yep. I would say it's probably balanced in, the yin and the yang is a perfect visual represon of it.
Yeah. So. Yeah, absolutely. The feminine and the masculine, any of those things. And so it's so funny, but that's where it gets to is right and wrong, right? It's always that. It's right and wrong. It's what is truth, right? But what is the question really being asked there? I think what it really is trying to not piss off an angry God, because they misunderstand God. So they're like, we've got to do this. What's the reason that we have to do this? Why do we have to rail against, LGBTQ? Why do we have to rail against anybody who is other? Why do we have to rail against Muslims? Why do we have to destroy Buddhist temples? Why do we have to do all of these things? Because if we don't, God's going to get so pissed off at us that he's going to destroy us.
Mm,
And I think fundamentally, there's a lot of these people that believe that. And I don't. That's not the God I worship. Not the God I'm
yeah,
going to deal with.
I think for most people, it is rage and sadness are the easiest emotions to
Yeah.
tackle.
Yeah.
It is hard to be happy. It is hard to feel for somebody else.
Yeah.
And so it's easier to just blame and hate.
Yeah.
And I this is kind of take a tangential drift away from where we are, but
Mhm.
I think one of the other things that is affecting our ability to be empathetic is it requires work.
It does.
And
That's big. That is big. Yeah.
we don't work on anything.
Yeah.
Like people look at politics. Going back to politics. Well, you know what? Somebody else will do that for me. Or I
Mhm.
voted. I did my part. You that's all you did was vote. You didn't do anything
Yep.
else. You didn't progress. You didn't
Yeah.
make any additional steps to move the needle. Um, you sat there while somebody next to you railed against black people and didn't stand up and say, "No,
Right.
you're wrong."
Yep.
Those moments we need to be standing up. We need to be asserting that these things are wrong and that we have to have faith in each other. We
Mhm.
and I know there are a lot of people out there who hate the concept, but the concept of the social contract. And
Mhm.
I don't know how
Mhm.
you can look at any society on earth and not say that
Right.
we're in a social contract.
Yeah.
The contract is rewritable and it is debatable and changeable, malleable, I think is the term I
Mhm.
want.
Mhm.
But we have to be in one. There's
Yeah.
be it a Christian society, be it a Jewish society, be it a Muslim society. We're all agreeing to what we believe the basic rules are.
Mhm.
And we realize that some people are going to lose out and some people are going to win out. But at the end of the day, everybody's going to try and at least get some bit of the pie that they don't feel to the point where they rebel or they fight or anything
Right.
else.
Yep.
And I think empathy is one of those components of how we rebalance that pie.
Yeah.
Um, because if you can't feel how somebody is doing, you can't answer for them. You can't represent them. You cannot walk in their
Yeah.
shoes to help their particular situation. So sorry, kind of got off on a soapbox there for a little bit.
Yeah. No, I think there's
For you specifically, like what are what are moments or things that you think we as society can do to better embrace empathy or to feel and better represent ourselves that we can move to a state of actually embracing empathy with each other without going overboard.
Yeah, so I did it today. I did it today. One of the people that helps with Brighton, is very right wing, and, we sat down today and talked about the riots in LA, and we just both of us, it was pretty amazing. We both sat in the discomfort as we disagreed about things, and we listened to one another, and I spoke and they gave me time to speak, and then they spoke and I gave them time. We analyzed together what we were saying, a lot of times saying back to the other one, this is what I hear you saying, right? And just spending that time doing the work, like you said, like literally doing the work to understand each other. um in my work, it's what I do day in and day out is I sit here and listen to people, um and really try to step into their shoes. I work with a guy who's living in the UK from South Africa, not understanding him, whatsoever. So just listening to his stories of growing up in South Africa, trying to understand, how that made him feel and everything so that I can help him progress to where he wants to be, in my coaching business and everything. So it's doing the work, like you said, being quiet, giving space, pausing. My opinions don't matter, in this while this other person is is talking. I really do believe even my energy can move somebody just because they go, wow, he actually cared to listen to me today.
Hmm. I you bring up one of the things that I've told people before, which is it, especially within a community that I'm not part of.
Hmm.
So, as an atheist, I'm not part of the Christian community.
Yep.
As a New Englander, I'm not necessarily part of the Southern mentality. I'm not
Yeah.
part of those groups, even
Yeah.
though I understand it. It isn't up to me to move that needle with that group
Right.
of what the beliefs are.
Yep.
It's up to me to try and communicate where the problem is and
Hmm.
hope that the people that I've communicated with will
Yep.
move that needle. And it's without understanding somebody, it's hard to communicate with somebody
Yeah.
to em- evoke in them the feelings and the thoughts that they need to tackle that. But they have to be willing to come forward.
Yeah.
Much like an alcoholic, if you want to stop being an alcoholic, you have to make that choice. Nobody
Yeah.
else can make it for you. Not
Yep.
that I've ever been one, but I've known plenty. That part of that is a personal journey, and
Hmm.
so they have to come to that point before they can actually take the necessary steps to move past it. And I think of it in that same respect with people in these situations, that you have to digest and absorb this information before you can even move forward. Um, and I, it's kind of one of the things that I see a lot of people blaming is social media.
Hmm.
And when in the days of when social media was truly like anonymous, um, the early 2000s, when everybody was posting anything and everything under pseudonyms and everything else.
Hmm.
There still are to some extent now, but if you look on places like Facebook or even Twitter or um, any of X, whatever they're calling it now, I just refuse because
Yeah.
I'm old. um, my age is showing. um, with people posting on stuff like that, your face is really out there now.
Hmm.
It's I mean, even with doing this podcast, my face is out there now.
Yep.
And so my opinions, my things are, you still find people posting some of the most horrible things and not
Yeah.
worrying about the. So how do we deal with that? Is the social media really the problem that is evaporating our empathy, or is it a symptom? How do we combat that?
Yeah. I just see it again as much bad as I see on social media, I see good on social media. It's both. Again, I see that it's both awakened us and numbed us and done these
Mm,
things. I think some people have really seen, oh wow, there's a whole lot more going on in this world for me to get involved in, and some people just jump into an echo chamber and don't really leave that. Um, so I don't know. I don't know, but I think, man, I don't know.
I no, there. To be honest, I don't have an answer for it.
Yeah.
I mean, the only thing that I can tell people is, if you see something, even if you think it's right, do your own research. Just like
Yes.
you were talking
Yeah.
about with.
Yes. Yeah. Do your own research. That's a big one. And yeah, just like the sermons or whatever else. And that's the same thing I do on social media. If I see something, I go, I don't know about that. Let me go and look that up
Mhm,
immediately. Right. Don't just take it for face value. Actually something did come to me from social media that is kind of what you're talking about, which is basically like get offline, get offline and go have a conversation with a real human about this thing too. Right. Because I think one thing that we've kind of talked about or hit on multiple times is that like empathy grows together in connection, you know?
I don't necessarily think you need to get offline, but I think you do need to be able to communicate with people honestly.
Yeah. Yeah. Or
So
just
it
like
very well,
yeah.
yeah, and maybe that's what needs to happen more is group chats amongst
Mhm.
people from different avenues. What is it, like chat roulette or something, where
Yeah.
you get
Yeah.
randomly matched up with
Yeah.
somebody. The only problem with that is like that you could end up in like a shouting match, which then could
Sure.
and I mean you might get into a shouting match with somebody. We're not all necessarily going to agree, but
Right.
at least by if you're honestly approaching it to hear somebody else's opinions, you're at least addressing how they feel and giving them a moment. What was there was the story about I think it was like a black preacher who ended up befriending the
KKK.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
And like honestly befriended him, not the guy who
Yep.
ended up taking over the KKK chapter, the one that ended up actually like befriending him and
Yep.
got him out of it.
Yeah.
He had a perception of who these people were. Oh well, this is how black people are, and that wasn't necessarily true. That
Yep.
may have been how some he had experienced were,
Mhm.
and then he created a stereotype and a bias based on that.
Yep.
And maybe at the end of the day, it just comes down to stereotyping and biases. We need to be able to challenge ourselves with our stereotypes and biases that we carry and allow it to change or allow there to be alternatives so that we can then go, okay, how does that person feel about how this is going on?
There we go.
I don't know. I don't know. Um, it's one of those things. This is one of those, before we started talking, I told you I was kind of at a low point on how I was
Yeah.
feeling about how people are addressing all of this.
Mhm.
And it's one of those moments that I keep harping on that we just need to be empathic. We need to have
Mhm.
that feeling.
Yep.
And I don't know. Give me something inspirational. Give
Yeah.
me give me
Um,
give me give me something to roll out of here with to keep the spirit high.
Man, inspirational. Well, I will tell I mean, the biggest thing that I can tell you empathy-wise and inspiration-wise is, when my daughter got sick and everything, we had people from every walk of life reaching out to us, helping us, donating to us, and we're 3 years, past her initial, um, diagnosis and everything, and people are still like they're still just coming to us and everything. And I'm telling you, at the time, I was feeling very low, maybe much like yourself now, and the empathy of America and where we're at and everything else. And when I say it renewed my faith in humanity, it really did. I was like, wow, okay, people are really so much more empathetic and everything than um, I think they are. And then the other thing that I would say is, um, like I said, I think it was before we started talking, but everything is done through action. So this is absolutely perfect for you to practice empathy, right? It's already something on your heart. You're wanting to be more empathetic and everything. So now it's like, man, look for opportunities for you to be more empathetic because then you're going to be giving to that energy of the world versus taking, from the world.
The
And that's how it changes.
exponential building of positivity.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I get that. I think is a very good message to wrap up on because I can completely embrace that.
Cool. Yeah.
Positivity builds on positivity, and maybe empathy builds on empathy.
Yeah.
So,
Absolutely.
well, very good. Well, I guess let's wrap it up here. I want to thank you for your time, Josh. This was great. I will definitely be asking you back when I come across another great topic to
Good.
pitch in front of you.
Yeah.
As always, it's a pleasure, man. I appreciate it.
Yep. Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.